Welcome back to the alcohol-free revolution. My name is James Lloyd.
My name is Steve Smith.
Well, it's episode 2, and we want to thank everyone who downloaded the first episode. We've been blown away by some of the feedback we've had. People really seem to be enjoying some of the things we spoke about. So Steve and I are super motivated to be bringing episode 2 and hopefully many more after that. Steve, how's your week been?
You know what? I'm bloody marvelous. I want to echo what you're saying as well. I'm blown away. I was having a little look around this morning on how we've landed, and we've got people in New Zealand listening to us, which is amazing. People in America. We've got all over Europe, Norway, Sweden. It's amazing, and I'm just so glad that this has landed well. Feedback's been great, and so looking forward to getting rolling with this. And the sun is shining. We're having a great summer. What's not to love?
Spot on. So today we're going to be talking about one of the big rocks that comes up regularly with our coaching clients, and that is the whole hornet's nest around socializing alcohol free. Am I going to feel left out? Are my friends going to think I'm boring? How am I going to handle that whole thing? This is probably the biggest blocker that I'd say in the people that I speak to, and it was something that I struggled with, but it's not quite as bad as you think it is. So, Steve, what's your experience with socializing alcohol free?
I think for me, it's patience. I mean, if I think back, 30 years of my life have revolved around socializing with alcohol. And I think looking back on it, it's almost too big to think at the beginning, what is it going to feel like to go to a wedding alcohol free, or what's an all-inclusive holiday going to look like alcohol free? And I think my message is kind of be kind to yourself, because you almost don't know what you don't know. And achieving or taking a break from alcohol is a learning experience. It's a massive learning experience. So if we bombard ourselves with questions like that in the beginning, then it can become really, really difficult to navigate. That said, it's a question that really needs to be answered as well. And it's something that's going to play on our minds. And I think giving some lived experience of that will help, because I did question myself at the beginning. I did think, will my mates just think I'm bloody boring because I don't drink? And I found as time moved on that necessarily wasn't true. And for me, I found a number of people that I thought were real friends that actually maybe were more drinking buddies. But you know what? I'm really lucky. I've got friends. My best mate I've known since I was at nursery. And I've got friends that I've known since I was 10, 11 years of age. They are mates. They are true friends. We've been through thick and thin together. And you know what? I had nothing but encouragement from every single one of them when I made that decision to go alcohol free. Brilliant. I then did realize there were people that I probably worked with that the only thing we had in common was getting pissed after work.
Yeah.
So I think it's finding that balance. And everybody's on their own journey. Things work differently for some people that may or may not work for others. But I think my biggest message is go easy on yourself and do what feels right for you. I'm not sure on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, do you know what? I touched upon it when we spoke last week, I think. But one of the things that kept me stuck for the longest was my friends, and not in a bad way. They didn't even know about it. But the thing that I love doing more than anything is going to live sport, football, rugby, F1. Have done for 30 years, and I just couldn't see how that would work if I wasn't getting pissed. We used to go out drinking for 10, 12 hours. The whole day would revolve around drinking. The sport was kind of the main event, but actually the real main event was the boozing. Or at least I thought it was. And I just couldn't get past that. Just couldn't figure out how I'd be able to do that. And then when I eventually got to the point where enough was enough, and I thought, I'm doing this, I'm going to go properly alcohol free, I sat down with my best mate and I said, look, I've got something to tell you and I don't think you're going to like it. And he was like, what is it? And I said, I'm going to quit drinking. I'm not going to drink anymore. And he looked at me and he went, and? What? So what? And I was like, you're not bothered? You don't mind? He was like, no, I've known you for 35 years. What difference does it make? And honestly, my heart melted. And and he was so supportive of everything I was doing. And honestly, our relationship has got even better since I quit drinking. He still drinks a bit, but he's definitely cut back a hell of a lot because he's seen the kind of transformation that I've been through in all areas of my life. And I think this is one of the great things about going alcohol free is other people notice, and over time they think, oh, I think that guy's doing really well. He's looking good. He's got loads of energy. He's really happy all the time, and it's infectious. And I think that's one of the great things about being alcohol free is it does have this ripple effect, on friends and family. And like I say, he still drinks. We recently went on a holiday to Austria together, and nothing changed. But actually, when I say nothing changed, what I mean is it didn't get any work. I didn't lose out on anything. But what really happened was, we're much closer because when you're present in the moment, and you're really kind of connecting, that's where you get a real buzz from being around people. That's the human connection part that I think is so valuable. And when we go out socializing without alcohol, those first kind of couple of hours where people are really listening to each other and they're bonding and they're connecting, that's when we get a release of dopamine, because we are fundamentally tribal creatures. We've evolved to be part of a tribe. We find connection and safety and security as being part of a pack, and also of course that's how we reproduce as a species. So we naturally get a buzz when when we're around people. But because alcohol's everywhere in social situations, we assume that it's the getting pissed part that makes us, feel good. But it's not. It's the human connection. And I've kind of experienced that, time and time again. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're nail on the head. I mean, it's we have associated that since like forever. If I think back to the book that kind of changed it for me when I made the conscious decision and made a solid break from drinking, was Alcohol Lied to Me by Craig Beck. And he reflects on there how there are Muslim celebrations in the world that go on for 2 or 3 days at a time, where everybody is having the most amazing time and party, where there's not a drop of alcohol in sight. And that's because we've been socially conditioned to think that alcohol is fun. And it is. I'm not taking away from that. It is. I can remember some of the best times drinking, but at the same time I can now also remember even better some of the best times not drinking. I mean, I gave an example last week. I was out with 20-30 old Fridays team from back in the day when I used to, and we were proper drinkers, and about 20 or 30% of us weren't drinking. And actually I spent the whole day with these guys a couple of weeks ago, a massive reunion, hadn't seen each other for 2 or 3 weeks, and I wholeheartedly believe it was one of the best days I can remember in the last 10 years, inclusive and excluding drinking, because I was totally present for that. I remember everything about it. I took the time to find out about how people have moved on over the last 20, 30 years. And it was just magic. But it's also really daunting at the beginning. And it's almost too big to comprehend. So if I stopped drinking in June, July. And my biggest fear moving forward from there was I think we'd had our holiday out the way that year. My biggest fear was Christmas. What would Christmas look like? What would New Year look like? But I was lucky enough to be 3 months in and beyond that by the time that came around. So I'd learned enough about myself to know that I could do those things. The first time I did it was tough, and there were times when I probably had to make the excuse to go early or not to go at all if that was the right thing to do. Everybody's on their own journey. For me, alcohol-free but beers were a massive crutch. They helped me hugely in the beginning. I get it, they're not for everyone. But I started to, as I progressed through this, become quite proud of the fact that I wasn't drinking. There was peer pressure a little bit at the beginning. And, but now, further down the line, people ask me how I'm not drinking, not why I'm not drinking. And that took some time to get there. But I remember that New Year. And I remember it was a friend of ours' house, and it was a big house, big party, lots of people getting very, very drunk. And I think I probably went through about 10, 15 alcohol-free beers on that evening to mix in and to feel like it. This moment came to me at about 11:30, just before the bells struck for midnight, and everyone was hammered and they were dancing in the kitchen. And I looked around, and I used to have this real fear of dancing. I used to drink to dance in front of people. I was really nervous about getting up to dance in front of people. And I looked at them and they're all dancing. And I thought, you know what? No one's looking at anyone else. No one cares what they're doing. They're all just worried about what they look like when they're dancing. So I had this complete clarity about it. So I just thought, you know what? Sod it. And I just got up and started dancing in the kitchen. And I remember it. And it was like I chipped that off. And I had a great night. I felt anxious. I felt awkward at the beginning, but I had a brilliant night. And the best thing about it was I got up the following morning on New Year's Day with a clear head for the first time in as long as I can remember. And I dragged my wife, and she'll scream at me because she was one of the ones that had a few drinks and dancing in the kitchen. I dragged my wife and kids down to the beach on New Year's Day, and we went open water swimming in the sea. And
Maniac.
I'm not sure it was popular with everyone, but you know, we had a cracking day that day as well. So, you know, I almost say play it forward. What does the next day look like? But you have to tick those little things off, right? You have to tick off that first social occasion. You have to tick off that first wedding, that first holiday, all those things, but they just get easier in time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. I always kind of compare getting, socializing alcohol free. It's a bit like building a muscle because, if you're our age, we're in our mid to late 40s, if you've been drinking for 30 years, that's kind of that's kind of what right? So you're not going to change that overnight. But with a bit of practice, a few weeks, I don't think it takes really all that long. And, in my experience and some of the people that I've coached, it's just getting used to a new way of doing it. And, I'll be completely honest. I'm not going to say to people that, yeah, you can still sit in a pub for 9 hours alcohol free and have exactly the same experience. You're not. It is going to be a bit different. I used to love to go and sit in a pub all day and watch 2 or 3 football matches back to back and get absolutely hammered. But I don't really have the drive to do that now. I don't really want to just sit at a bar for 9 hours. I loved it at the time, but I love different things now. And so there's no sense of loss there. It's just you evolve and things are just a little bit different. So yeah, you can still go out and socialize and have a great time, but after 2 or 3 hours, I'm pretty much done and I'm happy with that. I don't feel that I'm not part of it. I just have other interests and it doesn't feel necessarily like any, sense of loss. It just feels I'm really happy with the situation. I've got into new things that I never would have been into before when I was just in a pub or a bar. And I'm not, judging people, who do that because I did it for many years, but things are just a little bit different now. And then I look at what I've traded for those 8 hours sat in a bar and, it's a list as long as your arm of, really life-changing things, better health, more energy, more focus, better sleep, better relationships, the list goes on. I could go on for hours about the benefits of removing alcohol, but we focus so much on what we perceive that we're losing. And really, when you really break it down, you look at what you think you're losing versus, the laundry list of stuff that you're gaining and how, and ultimately, when you wrap the whole thing up, I'm much healthier and I'm much, much happier. I've never been happier in my entire life than I have been these last few years. So there's no sense of loss, whatsoever. And just going back to what you were saying earlier, I think, it does take a bit of getting used to, but you also in time set your own boundaries. You work out, okay, maybe I'm going to get there at 7, I'll stay till 10 and then I'll go home. But I think a lot of people that I speak to get really focused on and really bogged down in what are they going to say in that 1 minute when people say, what, you're not drinking? Oh, what, you're boring? And all this kind of perception around what people are going to say. And we really obsess over this. But I'm not even sure it's even a thing anymore because attitudes towards alcohol free are way different to what they used to be, particularly with younger people.
Mm.
And I think we get so obsessed with getting called out by people in a group and, people going, oh, well, you're not drinking. But I'm not even sure that really happens. I think it does in some situations, but, we're all grown adults. You really telling me you can't deal with that and you can't diffuse that? I mean, there's a myriad of different ways that you can diffuse that situation. But we see that as such a big blocker that, all my friends won't want to know me and they'll think I'm boring. Have you come across that at all?
Yeah, mildly. I mean, you're right, and I think when you look at it now, 25 to 30% of the population up to the age of 30 don't drink at all.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing statistics.
Which is, I think, it's just incredible. I think it's amazing. But in our generation, yeah, I think I remember those kind of comments more around whether I was having another drink that evening when I was drinking. So it was more of a case of if it was coming up to 11 o'clock and someone said another one for the road and you say, oh no, I'm done for the night, then you might get that comment, oh, don't be so, to get another one down, you come
Do
on.
they want one?
Yeah, exactly. So there was that. And then, but since I've given up, I could count easily on one hand the amount of times I had any comments like that. But like you just said then, they want another drink. Often I think it's when you look beyond it, it's, are people asking you that because they're questioning their own drinking and maybe, just maybe, they're a little bit envious of what you're doing.
It's holding a mirror up, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're holding a mirror up, and you don't also ever need to be that guy that says, oh, well, look at me, I'm not drinking at all. I think in time, you do become that lighthouse and you do actually show people can see the benefits that occur when you take that break. You don't ever have to say it. And you know what? When those first occasions come round, do whatever you want to do. I stopped, like I said last week, I stopped to train for Ironman. So it was easy for me because I just say, no, I'm training for a huge event next June and I've got to take alcohol out of my life for that reason. But if it helps you to say, you know what, I'm on antibiotics, or I'm driving this evening, or actually I've got a big meeting tomorrow, or something like that, do whatever you need to do. And if you need to lie, just lie. Because, or, if you need to go to the bar and get a couple of alcohol-free beers and stick them in a pint glass, no one knows. No one actually knows because 3 or 4 beers in, they're the ones that have had a few. They're the ones with the fuzzy head. They don't know that you're completely. You just get this massive reputation for being able to really handle your drink. But no one ever really knows. And over time, I've actually found now when I hang out with people that are drinking, even though I'm not, I still sometimes fall into that. It sounds weird. I almost feel a little bit like I'm a bit pissed, and that sounds a bit odd because I feel like I'm actually falling into that. The banter and the fun of it, and you get pulled into it, and you join in, and you become part of that banter because your brain's been wired to do that banter when you were drinking. So I do it. I remember it. I certainly don't say anything stupid that I might regret the next day, and I also don't send that stupid text that I might regret the next day. And I wake up the following morning and I remember everything.
Mm.
But in the beginning, I had to make those couple of little white lies just to get myself in.
You spoke a couple of times there about alcohol-free beers and alcohol-free alternatives. What's your experience been with those? How have they helped, replace, full fat beer? How have you used that?
I'm just so glad that I gave up in the last 4 years, because I think if I'd tried to give up 10 years ago and I'd been able to drink a warm Caliber from the dusty shelf on the back of the bar, it might have been a different story. And I get it, alcohol-free alternatives are totally you do you, right? And I'm, we'll, slight disclaimer from both me and yourself on here. Whilst we're coaching, when we coach people, we always will look at their alcohol consumption before, and I would never want to have anyone mark their alcohol consumption about mine. That's against mine, because we've got our own yardstick. If it's too much for you, it's too much for you. If you don't think alcohol-free beers are going to work for you, don't do it. If you feel it's going to be a trigger, don't do it. For me, it wasn't. A trigger at all. And actually, I still enjoy an alcohol-free beer. I still enjoy an alcohol-free gin and tonic. I'm struggling to enjoy alcohol-free wine. I'm not going to lie. It's getting there. But you know what? There's some brilliant alcohol-free beers out there now. There are some absolute brilliant. And some of my
100%.
most favorite beers are now coming back alcohol-free. I used to love Proper Job, and it's now available.
It's brilliant. Oh my God.
It's now available on alcohol-free, and it's brilliant. If you chill them down, they are great. They are really, really good. And if they help, then if it's a green light to do it, go ahead and do it. And I was chatting to one of my coaching clients the other day, and they were questioning around alcohol-free beer. And drinking 10 0.5 beers is not tantamount to drinking 1 5% beer. It doesn't work like that. There's a 0.5% beer has got the same alcohol content in it as a ripe banana or a brioche bun.
Yep.
So, and I heard a study, don't quote me, disclaimer again. However, it was round about this. You would need to drink somewhere in the region of about 45 0.5% alcohol-free beers within 2 hours without going to the toilet to be anywhere near the drink driving limit. again,
Yeah.
disclaimer, don't quote me, but the way our body processes alcohol is totally different. So it's not
Yeah,
a case of adding up the basic maths.
no, your body's processing the alcohol literally as quick as you're consuming it,
Yeah.
effectively. But yeah, I mean, you're dead right. Glad you mentioned Proper Job there because that has sort of been an absolute find in the last kind of few weeks. I think we're going to do an episode at some point on alcohol-free alternatives, and I've got somebody in mind that I'd like to invite on, but we haven't spoken to it
Is
yet.
it
But it's a
is it
huge
the head of
subject.
Proper Job?
No,
Because if he's listening, we love
no,
your
no.
beer. Send us cases.
I mean, I agree with you. I'm from the same camp as you. They've been just such a fantastic tool because I think when you remove alcohol, it does leave a big gap, and it's very jarring just to have this big hole in your life. But if you can replace it with something else, I mean, I drink probably 2 or 3 alcohol beers every night. So we've spoken before about this idea of change the ingredients, keep the ritual. You can still get home. I get home, I open a beer, I go in the fridge, I open a beer. It's lovely. The ritual is exactly the same as it was when I was drinking normal beer.
Mm.
In fact, that's a bit of an exaggeration because I normally basically crack the beer open in the car on the way home because you can do that on alcohol-free beer. But you're right. If you go back to when you were bartending, and I used to work in a pub as well when I was a lot younger, and the alcohol-free options were horrendous.
Yeah.
And you used to have like Caliber, which was awful, and then 10 years later you had Beck's Blue that was kind of marginally better. But now the quality of the alcohol free, particularly beers, but not just that, things like CBD drinks and kombuchas, there's so much choice. I've gone through about 100 alcohol-free beers because whenever I try a new one, I record it on my phone and I give it a score out of 5 so I can remember what good ones are and what the not so good ones are. And I'll be honest, there are some horrendous ones, but there are some gorgeous ones. I can think of about 20 that I've given kind of 5 stars to that I regularly order, and it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's such a growing market. And I was speaking to somebody a little while ago who works for one of the major alcohol-free brewers, and she was saying that what a lot of people do nowadays is this idea of zebra striping. Have you ever heard of zebra striping before?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for anyone who's not aware, zebra striping is when you go out and you have an alcoholic drink, then a non-alcoholic one, then an alcoholic drink, and then an alcoholic one. And that's a really big thing. I mean, I'd never even heard of it. But so the person who works for this particular alcohol-free brand basically told me that 70% of their customers drink an alcoholic beer in this zebra striping way. And I just thought that was quite interesting because that's just something I never would have done. I would have been like, well, that's a waste of time. I'm either going to get pissed or I'm not. But
Yeah.
it's a new thing because the quality of the product's so much better now. There's so much choice out there.
Yeah. Something that's kind of, springing to my mind there, just thinking about, we talk about the ability to be able to, can we enjoy ourselves as much on a night out when we're not drinking? I think we have to remember that there were some of those nights out when we were drinking that maybe we weren't enjoying them and they weren't actually as great as we thought they would be, and things were getting a little bit messy, or you wanted to get away. And the beautiful thing about when you're not drinking is you can go whenever you like, right? You can just leave whenever you want, and you can drive home, and that's a great feeling. The ability, that freedom to be able to do that. I remember that we had I think back to probably about 15, 16 years ago now. I had a bit of a family emergency. My dad ended up in hospital, and I had been out drinking, and I got that call, and I needed to get to a hospital. It was only 5, 10 miles away, and I was drinking. And someone had to come and pick me up and get me there. And thankfully, everything worked out okay in the time. But nowadays, if I get an emergency call or something, I'm there. It doesn't matter. I can be there. I can, at the drop of a hat, I can be somewhere. And as a dad, that's really reassuring. So there's all those opportunities, those positives that come from it as well. You don't, if you're just not enjoying the night, you can just go home. You can just walk out and leave, and everybody else won't even probably notice that you've left. And you can be in the car and you can wake up in the morning and with no regret.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really notices if you sneak out after a couple of hours because like I say, everyone's in their own head. Everyone just, is just doing their own thing. I think you touched upon it there when you spoke about dancing. We have this huge paranoia about what everybody thinks. But I hate to say it, but the reality is no one cares what you're doing. People are just bothered about what they're doing. We obsess about what everyone's going to think. But the reality is that people just don't notice. They don't care. And being alcohol free nowadays is so much more accepted and valued in society that it really isn't anything to be kind of concerned about. And it definitely is anything to be ashamed about. It's one thing you said about it there. I wear it as a badge of honor. I'm deeply proud to be alcohol free and I properly wear it. But I understand for people who are just kind of starting out on that journey that it can can be a bit of an identity shift, but it does take a little bit of time. But have you got any kind of sort of tips for how people can adapt to socializing alcohol free when they're first starting?
Think, like I say, it's just do what works for you. So for some people, it might be, you know what, it might be that you just need to make that decision in the first couple of weeks to not go,
Mm.
or to make some real rules for yourself about, I'm going to go, but I'm going to go for a couple of hours and then I'm going to leave. But equally, you will, certainly in the early stages, you're going to get moments where you have that craving. It's going to come. And it's that habit loop, right? It's breaking that habit loop. So if you're out and that craving comes, we always need to just remember that craving's only going to last for 15 to 20 minutes maximum. And it's just your primeval brain telling you that what to do when you're in that situation, because the first thing you've been told to do is drink.
Mm.
So it's your subconscious just telling you need a drink right then. But you can make that situation pass. You can absolutely you can make that situation pass, because you can take opportunities to breathe, to, I found, step away, take a few seconds just to take some deep breaths. And maybe if it means just nipping into the loo and just breathing and letting that moment pass, because ultimately it will pass. You can pause.
I think one of the things that I always recommend to people to do as well, which really helps, is be intentional about what you're going to do on a night out. So if you go out and you're thinking, I'll see how it goes, and I'll just play it by ear and see how things are, I think that's where people get into problems. I think if you leave the door ajar, it's going to happen. If you say to yourself, well, I'll see how it goes, invariably you're going to have a drink. I think you've got to be quite determined about, okay, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to stick to it, and have a plan. A plan's really important. So when people say, what are you drinking? You straight away know what your go-to is. I'm going to have an alcohol-free beer, or I'm going to have, soda and lime, or whatever it is that you prefer, and be pre-prepared about what you're going to do. And when people ask you questions about, how come you're not drinking, have your answers ready. There's any number of things that you can say. You can sort of say to people that I'm taking a break, and actually I feel great. Because when people say to you, why aren't you drinking? You say, well, I'm taking a break and I feel great. Who are they to sort of challenge you on that and say, well, no, you need to be having a drink? It's like, well, why? I've just told you I feel fantastic. So
Mm.
again, these sort of situations when you're pre-planned are kind of quite easy to defuse.
Yeah, I put out on, when I first trained as a coach, I put out a little ebook on my website, and it was basically 49 answers to give when someone asks you why you're not drinking. Because I think having some of those in your back pocket can really help. I think, it's not necessarily a point to bring across when you're not drinking, but there's a really great quote, and it comes from that great philosopher Billy Connolly, and and it's one of my favorite quotes from him, because Billy struggled with his drinking in the years, and he decided to quit 30-40 years ago now, I believe. And one of his quotes is, I just decided to give up while it was still my idea. And I just think, I just, that's so true. And we always have this view of it, of needing to hit a rock bottom before we need to make that choice to stop.
Oh, gotcha.
And I think people's mentality around that is changing now. And people are being so much more aware of the choice of going alcohol free. We don't need to have a rock bottom.
Yeah.
Ben on the Over the Influence podcast always says, I didn't have a rock bottom, but I could see it from where I was standing. And I think that's another great one as well. It's just, you don't have to have that moment to make that change. And once people start to understand that, like I say now, people say, well, how are you not drinking? Not why you're not drinking. And I like you, I wear it as a badge of honor. I'm so proud of the fact that I don't drink. I wake up, and something that, I've heard in the past, people when they first start their alcohol-free journey having dreams about drinking, and it never ever happened to me. But in the last month, on 2 occasions, I've now had a dream that I was out drinking, and I woke up. It was when we're in this bout of hot weather that we've been having recently. And on both those occasions, I woke up in the morning, and it'd been such a hot night. I'd had such poor sleep, and I woke up and I felt awful. And in the back of my mind, I've just had this dream that I was out getting hammered, and I felt a bit like I had a hangover. And I had this horrible moment for about 10 seconds of, oh my God,
Yeah.
what have I done? And then I was
Yeah.
like, no, no, it was just a dream. And that's happened twice in the last, and the joy that comes back into me when I realize it was just a dream
Yeah.
is amazing. And so, yeah, it's a huge shift. It's a huge change. And yeah, I think in the early stages, do what works best for you. But if you need to lie about it, lie about it. If you need to avoid the odd social situation, avoid it. But you'll soon get to learn how to attend them and tick them off and actually be proud of the fact that you can attend them alcohol free, and you get to enjoy it again the next day because you get to remember it all again the next day, and you remember everything that happened. And the same thing can go for holidays. You know, when we go on holiday now, I get up and I go for a run in the morning and I explore trails where we're going to take the kids, and I'll know where we're going to go for the day a lot of the time because I've got up first thing and been up for a run at crack of dawn.
Mm. Yeah, you're so honestly you're so right. I just want to just rewind quickly to something that you said, which is when you spoke about how you don't have to hit a rock bottom, to change your relationship with alcohol. I think that is such a shift in society at the moment because you know when when you meet somebody for the first time, and let's say you're out in a social situation, and they say, what are you drinking? And you say, I don't drink. I'm always really conscious that their immediate thought is, oh, right, you used to have a bit of a problem, did you? Or you used to be an alcoholic. And that is what most people, will think. But it's kind of changing, I think. And this idea around going to bring in the term middle lane drinking that I know you'll be familiar with, but this is something that I talk to people a lot about because this idea that you have to be an alcoholic to stop drinking, that the only reason that you would stop drinking is if you had a massive problem with it, is just such nonsense. This idea of, drinking being binary, being very black and white, where, all of a sudden, everyone's drinking and having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden you step over this line and all of a sudden, you're drinking vodka at 10 o'clock in the morning out of a paper bag on a park bench. This idea that there's this sort of step that you go over from being normal to being an alcoholic. But the reality is, it is a spectrum. It is a sliding scale. It's a spectrum in the same way that mental health is. And unless you're alcohol free, or on the other end of the scale, a dependent drinker, which is only about 1% of the adult population, by the way, fit into that bracket. Everybody else is on this scale of middle lane drinking. And wherever you are on that scale, if you are drinking regularly, even if it's, a bottle of wine a week, I'll put my neck on the line and say that it is holding you back. If you're drinking regularly, it is holding you back. And there's a myriad of reasons for that, we'll dig into those in a lot more detail in future episodes, but things like the impact that it's having on your sleep, the cascade effect from that. So even if you're a middle lane drinker and you're drinking, I don't know, 20 units of alcohol a week, which is still slightly more than kind of recommended guidelines of, 14 units a week. But if you're drinking regularly and you're in that middle lane, it is holding you back. And it is a tax on your performance. And I talk about this a lot to, people in business and in corporate settings. Just by addressing middle lane drinking, you're going to get a higher level of performance out of your staff. And on a personal level, from a health point of view, your health is going to go up a percentage by cutting out the drinking. So you're completely right when you say you don't have to hit a rock bottom to, benefit from taking a break from alcohol. It doesn't have to be quitting entirely. It doesn't have to be saying forever, but just looking at your relationship and sort of thinking, is this benefiting me or is this holding me back? And I guarantee that it's holding you back if you're drinking regularly. And that's not an opinion, and it's certainly not a judgment. That's a fact. There's science that backs this up. And it's a huge topic.
Yeah, you're talking about the the workplace, and the impact it has on performance there. But how many, I spent a good chunk of my life going out, the social side of going out after work. It's encouraged. The old Christmas party is encouraged. Come along, drink as much as you can, but be there on time the next morning.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, don't misbehave because
Yeah.
you're still on company time. What would be plow you with alcohol, and
But
then you're
what
still on.
happens when you give, sorry,
Yeah,
enough.
no, you
What
go ahead.
happens when you say to people, it's a free bar? What do
Yeah,
they do?
yeah,
They drink twice as much as they would do normally.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, I mean, in the way it's encouraged at work, but I think the world is waking up a little bit to it, and I think in short, the ability, the amount of alcohol-free options that are coming along now, and we're in a far better place than we were 10 years ago. People are catching on to the whole alcohol-free revolution, as we call it, and long may it continue. And I think it shows through to the younger generation. As I say, I think, will we be coaching people around alcohol-free living in 30, 40 years time? I think hopefully we'll be out of work. Well, I'll probably
Well,
be
I'll be
dead.
90. So. I
I'm not,
sincerely hope not,
I'm
but
not so
I know what you're
concerned.
saying. I've
But
got
yeah,
one thing else I want to run by you actually. What's your take on how, you're from the hospitality industry. I've got this kind of theory around how, well, it's not really a theory, it's an opinion, and I don't want to say something that's going to piss people off, but we're all sort of seeing how the shift towards alcohol-free living and cutting back on alcohol, is happening. You can see, like you mentioned it there, 39% of under 25-year-olds don't drink at all. And for people like you and I who kind of grew up in the 90s, that is unfathomable, even 10
yeah,
years ago, that could be the case. You're looking also at, 1 in 3 people last year did dry January. So clearly there is a massive awareness around the harms of alcohol and how I need to be cutting this back. And then you've got the rise of alcohol-free alternatives certainly within the grocery sector. So, I go into my local Waitrose, they barely ever got any alcohol-free beer in stock because it sells so bloody fast. But
mm,
you look at pubs, and it's been well established that pubs are really struggling. Pubs are closing every single week. But yeah, I go into most pubs and they've got maybe 1 or 2 alcohol-free beers. So I'm looking at 39% of under 25s don't drink. And what did I do when I was 25? I went out a lot. I went to pubs a lot. I don't think pubs are really catering properly enough for what people, particularly younger people, actually want. What's your take on that coming from, from that sector?
I think it's changing. I think it's moving forward. Certainly in London. It's great now in London that there are lots of alcohol-free beers now being available on draft, and there's that feeling of having that pint. At our graduation, we all went to Club Soda in
Yeah.
London. I was blown away at the selection of alcohol-free alternatives that were available there. Lucky Saint have got their own pub in Paddington. And I know they sell alcoholic beers as well, and that's fine. And I think, and I do think London's waking up, and I believe you can get alcohol-free Guinness on draft over in Dublin now and some parts of London. So I think it's waking up. I think as you move further out into the sticks, sometimes you're still struggling to get the options there. But as demand grows, which it clearly is, I think it's moving in that way. And you know what? I don't mind paying the same price for an alcohol-free beer as an alcoholic beer, because that's one of the common things I get that people speak. Well, you're paying the same money as you would for an alcoholic. Yeah, but I'm enjoying it. And
Yeah, right. No
actually,
tax though. That's the thing that sticks in
but
my.
exactly, it's still, but particularly a 0.5% alcohol beers, the process to make them is actually a heck of a lot more expensive than the process to make a regular beer. And they're obviously in smaller batches and the demand's lower. So, I'm all for encouraging it. I just think beer in London's too expensive, whether it's got alcohol in it or not nowadays. But that's my own opinion. But so yeah, I think we're waking up to it. I think it's got a little way to go. I think there's obviously some work to be done around wine, but we're getting there. We're absolutely getting there, and it's great to see.
I saw a post on social media a couple of weeks ago by Millie Gooch. I don't know if you know Millie Gooch. She set up the Sober Girls Society, and she's doing absolutely amazing work in this space. And she was saying that she was at Wembley Stadium for a gig a month ago, and they had no alcohol-free alternatives at all at Wembley Stadium. I mean, and that blew my mind. I mean, there's 10 million people in the UK that don't drink. 20% of the adult population don't drink in this country. And that's, to me, that is absolutely mind-blowing. And that's where I think that a lot of businesses in the entertainment sector are just massively missing a trick with this. It's a bit like I kind of almost compare it to going into a restaurant and them not having a vegetarian option. I think it's akin to that, but that's fine. But I just feel like there's such a big opportunity here, and I feel like a lot of places are just not in tune with what a lot of people want, and they're just not offering, and that's why I think a lot of businesses are struggling. I think it's a bit of a shame. But I think you mentioned there about the Lucky Saint pub, and I think they've got the model right because I'm not saying that we should have pubs that just sell alcohol-free drinks because the reality is people don't go to a pub and drink more than a couple of two, maybe three alcohol-free drinks because there's no alcohol in it. So it's not driving that consumption where you want one after another after another. It's not dehydrating you in the same way that alcohol, if you're drinking an alcoholic drink, it's dehydrating you because, it's a diuretic and your body's clearing out the water and you've got to keep topping it up. You wouldn't go to a pub and drink 10 pints of water, would you? So you kind of have to have that blend of offering, regular alcohol and alcohol-free drinks. And that's what Lucky Saint Pub does so well, is they've got that 50-50 balance. They've got a choice for both. And that's where I sort of see the future of hospitality in pubs. If pubs are going to survive, I think they need to massively increase the range of alcohol-free drinks. I'm not saying get rid of alcohol. It's never going to happen. But you've got to get the balance a bit more right and start bringing in some of these fantastic alcohol-free alternatives, I think, because there's so many of them.
And the world is waking up to it. And I say the world because I have friends in Munich, and the oldest brewery in Munich, Augustiner, has broken hundreds and hundreds of years of beer brewing licensing and or however you want to say it, on the tip of my tongue, but beer brewing tradition, hundreds and hundreds of years old. The oldest beer in Munich. I mean, Munich is built around beer, and they now have released their alcohol-free. There are some great alcohol-free beers in Munich. Polana do one.
Yeah.
Hofbräu do them. I did an event called Challenge Roth a couple of weeks ago, which is an Ironman down in Germany, and it was sponsored by Erdinger Alcohol Frei. So, it's waking up, and it's actually some great options out there. And if Munich can do it, if Germany can do it, anyone can do it.
You know what? I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I am facing my ultimate test in my 4 years of being an alcohol-free. So my best mate's getting married in October, and I'm the best man. And what's the main job that a best man has to do? Organise the stag do. And you won't believe where we're going. It's Munich.
The Science Museum.
It's Oktoberfest. So,
really? Wow.
Yeah, so I'm going to be at Oktoberfest in Munich this October for my best mate stag do. And yeah, that's going to be an eye-opener. That's going to be a challenge. But I saw some stats actually on, market penetration of alcohol-free drinks across different countries. And Germany's is the highest. So 15% of beer sales in Germany are alcohol-free beers. I think in the UK it's about 2% at the moment. So, but growing at a rapid rate. So I think, yeah, I'm looking forward to trying a few of those alcohol-free beers in Germany. I think that's going to be a bit of a lifesaver for me when I'm sat in those tents with all those big men in lederhosen.
I think in a way of bringing this episode to what an amazing way to sort of wrap things round on this is we started this episode by talking about whether or not socializing alcohol-free is possible and how that can play on our minds. Yet here you are 4 years later telling us with confidence that you're going to go to the biggest beer festival on the planet. And I have been to the Oktoberfest many times. I know what goes on at the Oktoberfest, and do that alcohol-free. And I bet you will come away from that having an amazing experience, as will everybody else that decides to go there and drink or not. And I think that's just such a great way of summing up what is achievable when we make that decision. And in time, yes, you can socialize. Life just gets better. Socializing gets better, and you remember it all. But it's a lot to expect at the beginning. So, like I said, be kind to yourself and take your time to wait for the results, because it doesn't happen overnight.
Mm. Well, look, it's been a great conversation. Look, just one for the listeners. I think we started off talking about socializing, and we've rambled on and covered a few subjects there. Stick with us. We're homing our skills, I think, with podcasting, but it's been brilliant talking to you, Steve, as it always is. So listen, where can people find out a bit more about you?
So on my Instagram, you can follow me at Soberilliant, and it's spelled sober, SOBER.illiant, ILLIANT, or my website address is www.soberilliant.com. And what about yourself?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how much I love that name. It just rolls off the tongue so beautifully, so brilliant. I think that's fantastic. So I'm mainly on LinkedIn. I post every day, Monday to Friday, about alcohol-free topics and the joys of alcohol-free living, and loads of tips and stuff like that. So I'm James Lloyd, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a website, which is alcoholfreecoach.com, where you'll find all sorts of tips and motivation, articles, and all about about my coaching, but please give us a follow and keep listening to the show, because like I say, we've got an awful lot to talk about over the next few weeks, and pretty soon we're going to have some pretty special guests on as well, giving us their take. But that's another one in the can, my friend.
That's it. And exactly. And we will get better. I will make sure my dog walker doesn't turn up halfway through the halfway through our podcast. But at least my lovely springador Jessie got to join in at some point during that conversation.
Yeah.
But hey, we're just two guys having a chat, and hopefully you're enjoying it. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the alcohol-free revolution. And if you didn't catch any of those links, they will be in our show notes. And we really look forward to catching up again next week. And in the meantime, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the summer, and we'll catch up next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.